Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 4. Good to see you all. Let's just give it a moment to allow everyone to arrive and get settled, and then we'll get started.
Harmony, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
It's Telly. Hi, are we supposed to have week 4, like all of the online content done by now, or are we supposed to come here and then do week 4 content? I'm confused which one we're supposed to do first. Or
Yeah, of course. Sure, Telly. Thank you for the question. So the recommendation is that you do as much as you can in preparation for the meetup. So the week before, I believe it's Thursday or Friday, you get the email that introduces the week, and then with the invitation to complete as much as possible, so that way by week our meetup together, you've got a little bit of familiarity, but by no means is the expectation that it's all done by our meetup.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Let's go ahead and get started with our time in, and then we'll move through an activity together. So just find a comfortable seat, whatever that means to you. And I invite you to place your hands somewhere on your body or even externally in the space with intention. So choose where you want to place your hands, and then really start to bring awareness to whatever you have contact with, and use that as an anchor point for your breath to begin. Let's take a full breath in, full breath out. Twice more, full deep breath in and out. One last time, full big breath in and full big breath out. And then just return to normal breathing, whatever that means for you. And I invite you to stay in this space of conscious breath. And as you do, I'll invite you to close your eyes if that feels comfortable, but you, of course, are more than welcome to keep them open as well. We're going to move through a progressive relaxation. This is called tense and release. And just as the name inspires, we will move through different areas of our body, bring tension and tightness, and then release that tension and tightness. So let's reconnect with our breath. Big full inhale. Big full exhale. Start to bring your awareness to the lower part of your body, all the way down into your toes, all 10 toes, ups into your feet, ankles. And I want you to tense all the muscles in your feet. Hold for 3, 2, 1, and then release. If available, you can wiggle your toes, roll your ankles, take any movement that feels good. And now bring your awareness up to your legs, tops and bottom, front and back. Let's tighten all the muscles in our legs. Squeeze and hold for 3, 2, 1, and then release. Perhaps a little gentle movement. Take your awareness to your torso. So from the hips all the way to the shoulders, front and back sides of your body. Tense and tighten all your muscles. Hold for 3, 2, 1, release. Make sure you're returning to breath each time. And then just noticing what's going on without judgment, staying curious about your body and your breath. Take that awareness now into your arms, from tops of the shoulders into your fingers. Curl your fingers, ball your fists, squeeze your arms for 3, 2, 1, and release it out. Maybe some movement to your fingers. I like to brush my thumb against the pad of each of my fingers. Maybe roll your wrists. And then bring your awareness to the top of your head, your face, all the muscles in your face. Squeeze and tighten all the muscles. Hold for 3, 2, 1, and release. If it helps to lower and open your jaw a few times, open and close your eyes, whatever feels right. Now, my favorite part, we're going to tighten every single muscle from head to toe. Here we go. Squeeze and hold everything a little longer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, release. And take a quick body scan and notice any feelings, any sensations, perhaps just a sense of here right now. And then take a deep breath in. Deep breath out. If your eyes have closed, gently flutter them open. Bring your hands in front of you and open the petals of your flower. And we'll finish with one flower breath. Deep breath in. Release out. Amazing. Thank you so much, everybody. So that's actually considered one of our progressive guided relaxations. I find, and the reason I choose to do this on week 4 is it gives you a moment to sort of get everything centered and focused on whatever's happened in your day, and then actively choosing to let it go. In that way, I find it really helps to refocus. So of course, we're all experience the tools differently, but my hope is that in giving yourself that opportunity to really consciously relax and activate different parts of your body, you'll have a little bit of a revived sense of energy because we're going into the brain today. Okay, so just a couple of notes before we jump in. I've turned the chat to host only, just so that we can stay on track. So any messages that you send will come to me directly. Because I'm going to be doing a slideshow presentation today, especially with help with some of the visuals, I won't have access to the chat like the whole time. So I'm going to ask you to pause any questions that come up, but definitely take note of them in some way. And then there's going to be pauses as we move along to open it up for questions, so that way I don't miss anybody's question. Okay. Awesome. All right. So here we go. Let me just switch over to my screen share. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up if you can all see brain-based learning, the first slide? Wonderful. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So brain-based learning. If you haven't heard of brain-based learning before, if it's a newer concept to you, this takes what we know about how the brain works into a classroom setting. So in brain-based learning, we're striving to optimally engage our students in the ways that they learn best based on utilizing the strategies that are rooted in neuroscience. So we want to understand how the brain is developing, specifically during childhood, and then how can we utilize yoga and mindfulness classes to support healthy brain development for children. An understanding of the brain is also going to help you understand why we do what we do here at Yoga Ed, including our teaching philosophies, positive behavior management techniques, and even down to the planning and delivery of yoga classes. We want to create safe, connected, meaningful classes so that children are going to learn best. So 2 caveats here. One is that the field of neuroscience is still relatively new, and it's open to change as new discoveries are made. And the second, my favorite, you do not need to know all of this in order to be an excellent teacher. It does help, though, what you are doing in terms of your effectiveness with your students and opportunities that you're going to have with your students, given where they are in the different stages of development. So we're going to start diving into the structures of the brain with an overview from newest to oldest in terms of development. So first, I want to bring your attention to the cerebral cortex, or what we call the thinking brain, and that's areas 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the image that you see. The cerebral cortex's purpose is to take the data from our senses and to make sense of them. This is what controls consciousness and action, planning, thinking, judging, any of the higher mental functions. And then there's structures underneath the cerebral cortex, the cerebellum and the brainstem. Cerebellum is sometimes referred to as the little brain, and the brainstem is responsible for all of our vital functions. So beginning sort of front to back, the frontal lobe includes the prefrontal cortex, and it sits right behind the forehead. The job of the prefrontal cortex gives rise to executive function. So this is what's involved in self-awareness, emotional regulation, social awareness, and again, those higher level cognitive functions like abstract thinking, planning, even our personality and behavior. So in short, it's thinking of it as who and how we view ourselves in the world. How this sort of shows up in the context of yoga, this would be the voice in your head as you're moving through class, maybe noticing if you're feeling anxious or angry or calm, as well as your reactions to those emotions. So maybe you're planning that you're going to ask a question at the end of class, or if you think of an adult brain and taking a yoga class, maybe you're making a list of what you need to get at the grocery store later. The parietal lobe is our aware system, and this allows us to understand our senses as well as understand relationships in space. So within the context of yoga, again, if you think about a pose like downward dog, this would be recognizing the sensations in your hamstrings, your shoulders, your hands and feet touching the mat, as well as knowing where you are in the context of the room that you're in. The occipital lobe. So this is the lobe at the back of the head, and pretty amazing that this is an entire lobe dedicated to our sense of sight. So visual cues, these are going to be processed through this lobe. And in the context of a yoga class, this may also be, what color is my yoga mat? What colors am I seeing in the space around me? What shape is the yoga mat? As well as your body in space. The temporal system is our what system. So we're understanding what things are. Through this lobe, we receive and interpret audio and visual input. We're comprehending language. This houses our memory, and it helps us to make meaning of our lives based on past experiences. So examples would be processing the sound of your breath, processing the sound of your teacher's voice and the cues, as well as maybe remembering or recalling how downward dog felt in the body yesterday compared to your present practice. The brainstem. So as I mentioned earlier, this is responsible for our vital functions. The brainstem also controls the flow of messages between the brain and the body. So the functions that are unconscious but necessary for life, digestion, heart rate, breathing, eating, sneezing, swallowing, alertness, and even our eye movement. And then the cerebellum, otherwise known as the little brain, its main function is to coordinate movement and give rise to our reflex responses. So it directs coordination, posture, and balance and equilibrium. And motor learning is stored here in the cerebellum. So the example for this is if you learned to ride a bike when you were younger and haven't been on it for 20 years, you can hop back on the bike and still recall how to ride the bike. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. And this to me sums up so much of the aha moments. At least that was my experience when I was first shown this slide. So this is an image of brain maturity in terms of those different lobes we just discussed. And it gives you the ages from 5 on the far left all the way over to 20 plus on the right side. And the blue is representing which parts of the brain mature first. So even though we discuss the brain front to back, the brain is really developing back to front. And so what that means is the prefrontal cortex, the one that's responsible for executive function, self-awareness, emotional regulation, that's not developed, fully developed, until a person is in their mid or late 20s. So if that wasn't like, whoa, for anyone, I hope it was for at least one person, because I think that that really helps us start to shift a little bit of the expectations we have on our 5 and 6-year-olds, even adolescents, because the brain is literally still under construction. What is ready and raring to go, which is what I'll talk about next, is the limbic system. Okay, so the limbic system is our feeling and reacting brain. And there's this great hand metaphor. Perhaps some of you are familiar with it, but so a lot of this is inspired by Dr. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson, who contributed to this idea of upstairs and downstairs brain, which we'll get to in just a moment. But they also use this hand model where we refer to what it means for someone to flip their lid. So if you take one hand up like this, you're going to tuck your thumb underneath, and this represents your limbic system, or the feeling and reacting brain. And then if you fold your 4 fingers over the top, this is the cerebral cortex. So when everything is sort of functioning and working in a state of integration, we're solid. But sometimes we flip our lid. And when that happens, we lose connection to the prefrontal cortex, to everything that sort of rationalizes, helps us problem solve. And we're purely firing from that emotional reaction response survival brain. So think about that now in the context of the children that you're working with. The limbic system is developed at birth. So this is why this is such an area of focus, especially for early childhood. What's interesting is that the limbic system is like a roadmap for how we feel about the world. So if early on you're receiving experiences that would reinforce the world is lovely, you are lovely, then you're going to take that into the world, and it will make you relatively resilient to the experiences that would contradict that feeling. On the other hand, if you receive early childhood experiences that say the world is dangerous or scary, you're going to have this inner felt sense that the world is a scary place, and adverse experiences are going to reinforce that felt sense. So this is also where we start to see differences in how children feel about the world as a function of their environment, depending on from an early age. And I will, just so everyone knows, I will send some resources in the follow-up email for books and resources by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. So going a step further, and we're going to look at the thalamus and the amygdala. The thalamus is the hub or relay station for all information, all of the senses except the smell sense. And these senses connect to the thalamus before they're sent to the rest of the brain for processing. So this part of the brain is also involved in things like pain, temperature, and functions in memory and emotion. Also regulation of consciousness, sleep, and alertness. The amygdala, this is the almond-shaped set of neurons or brain cells that plays a key role in emotional processing. So its role is to recognize facial expressions, body language, and emotions and behavior. And the amygdala is constantly scanning the environment for any emotionally relevant stimuli. So there's two possible pathways from the amygdala to the thalamus. Let's see, hopefully you can see my cursor. So one is the indirect pathway. So we receive the emotional stimulus, it moves up through the thalamus, all the way processed by the cortex, back through the amygdala, and then an emotional response is initiated. But there's also the possibility of a direct pathway, meaning we receive the emotional stimulus, and the moment it reaches the thalamus, it immediately is sent to the amygdala, and emotional response is produced. So think of it as it's almost like an ability to hijack the brain. And the emotional response happens before the rest of the brain catches up. So if we think of this from an evolutionary point of view, standpoint, this is important because it's for our survival. So this is the reason why you might hear the example of if we come across a snake, rather than pausing and going through the time to think about, oh, let me recall from my prior knowledge what kind of snake this is. Let me check out its markings. Let me think whether it's a poisonous snake or not a poisonous snake. None of that happens. It's like, see it, danger, get out of there. So it's an important aspect of it's an important feature of the brain to be able to make those quick decisions, quick responses. But what's interesting is that the brain doesn't distinguish between an experience that is intensely imagined and an experience that is real. So our brain will still respond to a perceived threat just as strongly if it were a real threat. And what we can take from this is that emotional experiences are real experiences. They are experienced just as real in our bodies and in our minds. So I kind of referenced this a little bit earlier, and we're going to dive in a little bit further before we take a pause for questions. So the upstairs and downstairs brain. In child development, the downstairs brain is developing first, then the upstairs. So we have this perfect storm for children to flip their lids, which is what I mentioned earlier. So what that means is that our younger students can also get stuck in their downstairs feeling emotional brain without the regulation of their thinking and cognitive brain. We as educators need to be aware of when a child is in their downstairs brain or in their upstairs brain and meet them where they are. This is how we utilize tools to help them build and also strengthen. Think of it like a stairway. The upstairs is the upstairs of a house, downstairs of a house, and we want to grant access through the stairs in both directions. So we want our thinking brain to be able to check in with our feeling brain. How are you feeling? We also want our feeling brain to check in with our thinking brain. I'm feeling this way. What are you thinking about that? So the thinking communicates with the feeling, and the feeling communicates with the thinking. And this is what we call integration. In terms of our yoga and mindfulness tools, this is incredibly important as we introduce more tools that support self-awareness, self-care, social awareness, relationship skills, because we're helping our students to optimally tolerate some sensations and emotions and respond consciously rather than react. Okay. Sorry, there's a plane flying over, it's really loud. So as you can imagine, what are the impacts of trauma and the brain is a question that comes up a lot. And I have chosen to include this slide just to give a very broad overview of things to be sort of high level to be aware of, but also knowing that there's so much more. And if you're curious, we actually do have a trauma-informed yoga training as well with Megan McWilliams. And she dives deep into all of this information regarding the different types of trauma and how to support through yoga and mindfulness. So I'll also share the resource with you in the follow-up email. So looking at this from sort of a high-level perspective, childhood trauma can affect different parts of the brain. So regarding the upstairs brain, the prefrontal cortex and the higher brain functions are vulnerable to traumatic stress, which would affect our ability to think and respond flexibly in the moment. This can also impact tolerance of bodily sensations, awareness of emotions, ability to stay in the present moment, or focus on the task at hand. In the downstairs brain, this can show up as amygdala activation, which changes in response to trauma as well, making the amygdala more reactive to triggers, especially emotional ones. So this means that there may be an increased struggle to regulate our emotions. There are three major variables that we also have to consider. And again, which is why there's no way we would have sort of the time to go into this and why we have a whole course dedicated to it, which is the different types of trauma, the duration of the traumatic event, and also when within the scope of development the trauma occurred. All that said, neuroplasticity is pretty amazing because we have this ability to physically change in response to our experiences. So our brain is built to learn and relearn. Thus, the pumping iron brain, the more you practice, the more we use a skill or a thought process, the stronger and easier it's going to become. So in conclusion, within working with children, we have to be conscious of the expectations that we place on our students. We have this unique opportunity as yoga educators to approach things with an understanding of brain-based learning and to be conscious of those expectations that we are asking our students to fulfill. We also have this amazing ability to utilize our tools to help them build, again, that stairway for integration. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a moment. We'll come back to this. It's a lot of information. Thank you, everyone. Jot down any questions if you have. I want to give you one personal example of how this showed up in my work, and then I'll open it for questions before we do the latter part. So when I was working in a kindergarten classroom, I was working as an assistant kindergarten teacher, but I was also the school's yoga and sort of health and wellness coordinator. And we were early on in the beginning of the kindergarten year, and one particular student, Olivia, had a really difficult time with separation anxiety. So every time mom would drop off and try to leave, it would be just a complete example of flipping the lid. And what I like to reference here is it was a very real threat to Olivia that mom was not going to come back. in her mind with her emotion, like where she was emotionally. And because she wasn't able to sort of reason and rationalize, like, oh, well, at 2:05, mom comes back and picks me up. It was just overwhelming. So perfectly understandable given now what I've just discussed in terms of where she was at developmentally. So I started working with her just to come into a place of being aware of her breath. And I met her where she was in the downstairs brain. I validated her emotions. We used more like quick breaths, like to try to like meet where that breath was happening and then kind of slow it down over time. We tried a lot of different creative approaches to the different breathing exercises. And in time, she not only started to like have a connection with the breathing exercises, she then wanted to create her own breathing exercise. And what was amazing is at the time we were reading this book about a whale called Boris. So she named it Boris breath. And she had this whole like dolphin whale type movement and a spin and a fall to the floor. I mean, she was like an interpretive dancer at the same time. It was incredible. Flash forward a little bit like later and still, early on within the year, now Olivia is coming up to me at drop off time and tugging on my shirt and saying, Miss Harmony, my mom's about to leave. I need to practice my breathing. So she became so aware of this of breathing as a tool to help regulate how she was feeling and to move into a place where then she could then start to refocus on her day ahead. Like that was she was empowered to do that. It wasn't me telling her you need to do this. It was her coming to me and saying, I know what I need. So this is our like amazing, incredible opportunity as yoga educators. And this is why we really try to incorporate this conversation as part of our training so that we can take that information and use it to everyone's advantage. So any questions at this point? Just scrolling through, making sure nobody's waving me down. Okay. Great. All right, well, then in that case, we will dive back in. So the next thing we're going to discuss is teaching to the developing brain. And we are going to do a bit of an activity in just a moment, so have your chat fingers ready. Developmental milestones, these are a set of functional skills and age-specific tasks that most children are able to perform at a certain age. And I do want to emphasize most because at the end of the day, each and every child is so unique, but this gives you sort of a map for which you can start to have some sense of what may be happening across the different grade groups. So they're really useful in understanding what skills children may be able to learn as a result of their brain development. If you're curious where this information is, it's in your teacher's guide, but I don't want you to go there just yet. We're going to do a little activity. Okay, so let me get the chat open. And everyone should be able to chat now. Okay. I'm going to read off a couple of developmental milestones, and I want you to take your best guess. For some, this may be a review. For others, it might be a wild guess, or maybe you have a little bit of experience with your own family or friends of the family or within your own teaching settings. But the purpose of this exercise is not to point out what you know or don't know, but it's to, again, tap back into that sense of curiosity and think about, if I now know this, how does that sort of shift my perspective and how I interact with my students? Okay, are you ready? So the first one, friends become even more important, as does independence from family. Okay, hold. Let me read it one more time. Friends become even more important, as does independence from family. Now, here are the grade groups you can choose. So you have pre-K, kinder, first through third, or fourth through fifth. So go ahead and let me know what you think. Okay, it's raining 4 and 5 with some 1-3s in there. Great, yes. Okay, I would say 97% for 4 to 5. Okay, great. Yes, that is a 4 to 5 milestone. But again, for those of you who put 1 to 3, that's not to say that you haven't already started to see or experience that your students haven't already started to experience that. There is, of course, always exceptions to the rule. Okay, with those same grade groups in mind, how about can tell the difference between fantasy and reality? Can tell the difference between fantasy and reality. Okay, a little more mixed this time. I've seen kinder, 1, 3, 4, 5, pre-K. I've seen all of them. Okay, interesting. 3, 4, and 5. So maybe a little bit more mixed groups. Kinder, preschool. Okay, are you ready? This is found in preschool milestones. All right, last one. And I mean, deductive thinking, you're probably going to know what the next one is, but I still want to share it with you anyway, just in case you have different experiences. Interested in how things work and can begin to use logic and critical thinking to solve problems. Okay, saw some kinders, lots of 1, 3s. Kinder and 1, 3. Okay, so this one pops up during grades 1 through 3. Okay, thanks everyone for contributing your chat. I'm going to go ahead and turn that back off for a moment and get back to this. So the question that we've all sort of probably been waiting for, and activities, specific activities for how do we now support the brain with yoga? So we look at this across 4 different areas: movement, play, emotion, and social learning. So what I'm going to ask you to do, we're going to just take a real short 15 seconds for each of these. And I want you to write down, you don't have to put it in the chat. You can just write it somewhere that you can refer to it later about how you think these 4 come up. So we'll go one at a time. So how does movement show up in the context of providing a yoga class to your students? So just take about 15 seconds and note down some ideas. And this is one where I always feel like I have to say it's not a trick question, I promise. Great, okay. How about play? How are we supporting play through yoga education? What opportunities are there? And this can be within the context of everything that you've learned thus far in the yoga ed curriculum. This can be how you approach your classroom learning. It's really open at this point. Okay, emotion. How are we supporting emotion when it comes to yoga education, and in what ways specifically? And then the last one is social. How is yoga education supportive of social learning? Okay, So keep those saved. We're going to come back and I'll have a few of you share out in just a few moments. But in order for us to finish this slideshow, I'm going to have you pause for a moment. So the last piece that we discuss is social emotional learning, which is sometimes referred to as SEL. In a moment, I'm also going to share a website with you, CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. This is a resource that's evidence-based knowledge for preschool through 12th grade educators and leaders. It's an incredible, their website is an incredible resource for breaking down the framework of SEL into the 5 competencies. So those 5 competencies are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So I'm sure you're already like bells are going off with how this shows up in the context of the yoga and mindfulness we offer in our classrooms. So just as an overarching approach, social and emotional learning, this is the process through which children and adults are understanding and managing emotions, being able to set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, as well as make responsible decisions. So the significance here as well is that Yoga Ed was founded on the 5 core competencies of social emotional learning. And where we hope this supports you in your journeys is that you can now speak to how this can benefit, how you will benefit your schools, your studios, your community centers by being able to support social emotional learning within the scope of using the Yoga Ed curriculum. So it's really important to understand not only what it is, but why it matters. And as you approach, school districts, principals, administrators, organizations, grants, it can be really helpful to know that this is another tool in your tool belt to be able to put forth of why your yoga program and utilizing the Yoga Ed curriculum is so going to be valuable for them. Okay. So we're going to circle back to SEL in just a moment, but as promised, could I possibly ask maybe 2 or 3 people that would be willing to share their ideas from the 4 different areas discussed? So movement, play, emotion, and social. How yoga supports what ideas you had. And how I'd like you to do this is if you would type your name, well, I'll turn the chat back on. If you will type your name in the chat, and then that way I can easily call on the person. If I could get maybe 2 or 3 people, that would be awesome. Great. So Maria Samuels, go ahead and unmute. Thank you.
Which section do you want me to first?
Oh, it's a little hard to hear you, Maria. It's cutting in and out.
Which topic did you want me to refer to?
If you could maybe just pick one of the categories, so movement, play, emotion, and social, just choose one and then share some examples.
Okay, I chose social learning because you are working with not only how to interact with adults as the instructor, but the students as your peers, and then as partners, if you're doing partner poses, you're learning how to appropriately within a classroom. You're learning how to sit and be your own individual, and then you're learning to interact in turn. So you're learning socially how to behave with amongst a group, but also as just your own individual entity.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Maria.
I have a question. Let me ask you one more quick. I know that you said that you're going to a school to talk about program Yoga Ed. Do you say that you're with Yoga Ed, or do you say that you are using the curriculum from Yoga Ed?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Maria. If I can, I'm going to pause that question and let's come back to it at the end, just so that I can address it a little more fully.
Okay. Cool.
Thanks, Maria. Awesome. Okay, let's see. Molly B.
Hey, I picked play, and I just think with games, big time, whether it's icebreaker or whether it's, something get to know you, there's a lot of movement going on. And then obviously, just the asanas, the partner poses, it can be really playful. And then the yoga story or yoga adventure, I think would be a really big aspect of play as well.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks so much, Molly. Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, it's sort of woven, I think, into the fabric of the lesson plans, but then it's also very much about the approach and how you are choosing to sort of dive into the playful aspects. Great. Okay, just one more. Nancy A.
Hi, I was focused on emotions, and whenever I work with my children and I can tell they have that amygdala hijack going on, I like to ask where they're feeling their emotion. And sometimes they can identify like, oh, I feel tense, I feel it up here, or I feel angry, I feel it up here. And so after doing some kind of breathing exercise, sometimes finding the right poses that will allow that knot to unravel can sometimes help them work through that emotion.
Nice. I love that phrase, help them not to unravel. I'm thinking like, you can have a ball of yarn at the same time and then like throw it. Say, this is what we don't want to happen in our bodies. We want to kind of stay here in the ball with all things working well together. Yeah, that's great, Nancy. Thank you so much. So, it's again, really highlighting the potential for tools and the potential for, it's one thing for us to take on this information, but know that you can also share this with your students. And in sharing about the brain, how the tools support with your students, you're really helping them to get that next step, which, again, is empowering their experiences on and off the mat. Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much. Elisa, I do see your name, but for time's sake, I'm going to move on. So thank you so much for your understanding. So this last resource I want to share with you all, and so that we have time for one last little activity, is, as I mentioned, the CASEL website. So I'll share this with everyone too. The reason I chose to link to this particular page is because you can actually click on the different competencies, and they've done a really amazing job at listing out some of the things that you might consider in supporting this particular competency. And the reason I love this is because let's say you decide that you really want to push social emotional learning and create some themes and concepts to support each of these competencies. Whether it's per lesson, whether you do a whole unit on it, there's really so much fun you can have diving into these. But again, the reason I shared you on this particular page is because I find these points incredibly helpful for thinking about how you want to narrow down to discover what theme and concept you want to work on. So with that said, we're going to try this together as a group. And I want us to work on relationship skills. So I'll kind of talk about a little bit of this, and then I'm going to exit out of screen share. So relationship skills, this is the ability to establish and maintain healthy and supportive relationships, and to effectively navigate settings with diverse individuals and groups. So some of the skills you may encounter: communicating effectively, developing positive relationships, demonstrating cultural competency, practicing teamwork and collaborative problem solving, resolving conflicts, resisting negative social pressure, leadership, offering support and help, and standing up for the rights of others. I'll give us the theme. So the theme is going to simply be relationship skills. So it's huge. It can really go anywhere from here. What I'd like you to now do let's think about grades. Let's make it, actually, let's do 2. Let's go real young first, preschool. What's a concept with preschoolers in mind, considering those skills that I just listed off? What's a phrase, a question, a statement, something that could stand as your concept that would support preschoolers in understanding relationship skills? And you can go ahead and add it to the chat. Great, thanks, Colleen. Yeah, sharing. Oh, here they all come. Kimberly, partnership, Tele, manners, Elisa, sharing as well, Tash, friendship, Heather, all different kinds of families, Dominique, community helpers. Oh, they're coming in so fast now. Erin, team building, respect, importance of being a good friend, helping, sharing, partner poses, stewardship, kindness, listening to one another. Awesome. So now I want to push your thinking a little bit more. Let's see, what was something that came up quite a few times? Let's go with friendship. What about friendship? What within friendship is the specific takeaway that you want your students to leave your class and be like, I know about this now? So dive a little bit deeper, peel back one layer. Okay, so maybe being kind to others, support and trust. Friends can help us and we can help friends. Saying something nice to someone, how can we be kind to ourselves? Treating others how you'd want to be treated. Great, communication. What you do or say affects one another. Okay, some of these ideas are really amazing, but I'm wondering if they would be more suited to 4th and 5th graders. So let's do that next. Let's choose a different aspect of this. I'm gonna pick, what was another one that kept coming up? Let's do helping. So the reason I'm choosing the single word is what I would actually do now is I would shift the theme to be helping, because I know that's what I want to focus on within the bigger idea of relationship skills. And then I'm asking you to go a layer below or a layer deeper. What is it about helping that you want your 4th and 5th graders to take away? Okay, interdependence, acts of kindness, service, which yoga tools can help us, helping others fill their bucket and yours as well, contributing to teamwork, selflessness. Amazing, everyone. Yeah, thank you. Compassion, volunteering, awareness of others' feelings. So hopefully you can start to see that. It makes me want to like get out a tree and be able to use like a visual chart. But it reminds me of a tree, and it's kind of like the trunk of the tree is where you house the big rooted idea, which would be relationship skills. And then as the tree grows and branches, all the branches could be kindness, helpful, sharing, empathy. And then you have the leaves on the branches for each of those. And that to me is really where you start to get to your concept, because it's the specific takeaway within each part that leads to the bigger whole. So moving through this process, and as you continue to work on creating themes and concepts, especially when it's going to come up as you speak to it through your teaching, keep asking yourself, can I go a layer deeper? Can I be even more specific about what I want my students to learn within this category? And then, of course, considering their age group in what they're going to be able to find connection to. Okay, yay. Thank you so much, everyone. Good. I wanted to leave at least 5 minutes at the end, just because there is a lot of information and in case there's questions. So let me begin with Maria's question before I forget it. I've been like holding it in the back of my brain the whole time. So the question was, just to reiterate, in approaching schools, how do you sort of approach in terms of like what your experience is? Like, are you a yoga ed teacher? Are you someone who's just been trained by yoga ed? So like sort of what's the verbiage around that? So I can speak to this. Before I was an official yoga ed employee, I was an independent contractor, and I would go to different schools and I would have programs. And basically what I said is that, you know, I'm like my own entity as a teacher, but my training is with yoga ed. So I have a certificate of completion having taught children's yoga, teen yoga, trauma-informed yoga. And that's my, it's kind of like, you know, maybe referencing if you have like a specific, my gosh, my brain. If you have a specific specialty, or if it's your degree. So it's kind of like you're focusing more so on the training that you would share with the people, not that you are a yoga ed employee. That would be something totally different. You can, however, become a yoga ed educator, a recognized yoga ed educator, which is like a few additional steps. So if you're curious about that, email me and I can send you some information about that. And that basically just means that you are recognized on our website as a yoga ed educator. Okay, other questions? Especially if there's anything about today's topics. Yeah, Kimberly.
I was just wondering if you could give an example of that, going to that leaf example. I did the tree. I don't know if you can see it. I did the tree.
Yay!
So you said that like if your idea is relationship and then your branches are like empathy and kindness, and then the leaf would be your concept. Could you give what you would consider an example of what that in-depth layer is?
Sure.
Please.
So yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let me follow your tree. Relationship skills into kindness.
Yep.
So then from there, I would, and somebody I think kind of tapped on this earlier, I would probably split it into 2 lessons, depending on the age group. And the first, I would focus on how can I be kind to myself? And the second lesson, I would focus on how can I be kind to others? Now, if it was older students, I might combine and do how can I be kind to myself and others within the same lesson. But I mean, even preschool, you may back it all the way up to what is kindness? Why is kindness important? How do we practice kindness? All those leaves. So yeah, Kimberly, it's really, and you know what I always suggest, and I hope I put this somewhere in my email flurry to you all. I often jump to the discussion and I think about what questions would I want to ask my students. And then as I'm kind of like hashing out the way the conversation would go, almost always by the time I get to the end, I'm like, oh, look, there's my concept. That's actually what I want the takeaway to be. So sometimes in like moving through what you imagine asking students helps you sort of pull back some of those layers. This is the first time I used the tree metaphor, and I'm glad that it worked.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, any other questions? Okay. So I did get a request to send the information about being a yoga ed educator to everybody. Here's the deal. The yoga ed team is like all over the world. So my time zone is very different from others, and I may not be able to get the specific information in time for that email to go out to you all because it's scheduled. So that's why if you are really interested, I would rather you email me so that way I can give you the most updated information. Okay, so I will shoot my email to you all. And you can simply just say like Yoga Ed Educator, how do I do it? And then that way I can make sure to follow up with programs to find our latest requirements and then send that to you. Because yeah, unfortunately for programs, it's already evening for them and they've logged off for the night. Like many of you, I'm sure. All right, everyone. Well, I don't see any more hands. I'll, of course, stay on as I do for a couple minutes. But otherwise, thank you so much. Next week is anatomy and physiology, which I love also. It's a lot of information again, so prepare, and I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Lisa, I saw your name pop up and it looked like you had a question. What was
Thank
your
you.
question?
My phone, apparently, like if it's so sensitive, I've noticed if I just barely touch it to try to chat something, it's sending something or it's turning me off. And I'm like, wait, who's that person with no face? That's me. I'm like, oh no. So I was just, what is the exact wording for the email? Was it recognized or featured yoga teacher, yoga ed teacher, or yoga ed educator?
Oh, yeah, Yoga Ed Educator.
Okay, yoga ed educator, but that's sounds like what you would be because you're an employee. So what's your title then to distinguish?
My title is education specialist and yoga ed trainer.
Okay, so I'm an education specialist too. So right now I'm yoga ed trainee and education specialist. Okay, all right, fantastic. So yoga ed educator. That's the
Yes.
phrase. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
And we're good on the other stuff. The if you need something from me, feel free to email me, of course.
Sounds good. Thanks, Elisa.
Hi, Harmony.
Hi, Danielle.
I'm sorry I was late. I do know I was 15 minutes late, so I'll be doing the Flipgrid as well.
Great.
And just letting you know, feel free to add any kind of critiques because sometimes I don't always understand. So I know like your last critique was really, really positive, and I was like, but she didn't tell me anything to work on. So feel free to let me know if there's anything else I should have done or missed, okay?
Of course. Yeah, thanks, Danielle.
Have a good night.
You too. Judy, do you have a question?
I thought I did, but I think you've answered it. So
good.
good night.
Okay, good night.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Luke, I saw your message, so I'm happy to stay on for a moment. And then Kelly, are you there? Do you need any support? Okay, great. Luke, I'm happy to I can stop the recording. Is that okay with you? Or if you feel like the question would be helpful for others, I can keep it on.
It's mostly just my particular situation since I got in so late. So
okay, so just give me 1 second. I'm going to stop the recording.
no problem.